been listening to my colleagues here, the candidates, and I love your ideas. And a lot of it really does reflect what I've been thinking about too. Lisa, recently we talked about, in terms of this public-private partnership, the idea of getting more art into our world by getting together with, in the case that you and I talked about, with the developers and saying, here's an opportunity when you're developing a place like the Summit, let's introduce the artists to the developers and say, how do we integrate art into this development? Because that is missing. I mean, it's very much missing in the district, whether you're talking about New Fairfield or Danbury, Bethel. Sherman has its own little internal life, which I think is actually maybe has a little more exposure to the arts. There's music, open mics, and it's a smaller community, and people are much more, I think, connected with some of their artists in their community. But I see that as something that's really missing from much of our district, and it's not going to happen organically. We're going to have to make it happen. And I feel like those projects are a really great vehicle, and we need to be very conscious and very, and I think very directed in terms of going out and reaching the new projects in our district and say, how are you going to integrate art into this? I also want to say that I feel like we're missing an opportunity with a resource we have at the university with WestConn. And, there's an incredible art center in WestConn. The music and the performance art that's being done there is amazing. And I got to say, I lived here almost 30 years, and my first performance I went to was just a year ago. And it's just not something I, as a community member, really was familiar with. And I grew up in a university town, and that the community was much more involved with the arts that were offered through the university. And I feel like that's another opportunity we should try and build into and expand out into the community. The last thing, there are two more things I really quickly want to say is that we really need to involve the community in developing these approaches. And we saw that recently, and I know you're familiar with this, with the idea of a Marian Anderson mural. And the fact that the community wasn't engaged in developing that idea and hasn't been, particularly the Black community in Danbury, where this is a very proud heritage of our city, and isn't really involved in thinking through how are we going to do that effectively. We miss an opportunity. If we do it right, then the community involvement will mean that there's much more appreciation of it in the long run. So, and then finally, the last thing I want to say, it's not really connected to all this, but I do think that one thing we can do in the state is always think about the artist as a worker, or as that there's a need to also consider the life of an artist or people in the arts, and understand how important it is that when we develop programs for working families, that we're including people engaged in the arts. And so I'm very proud that the paid family and medical leave program is accessible to sole proprietors and independent contractors, which means artists and musicians are going to have the opportunity to participate voluntarily in this program. And that's something I think is really important as legislators that we think about as we're developing new programs, whether it's healthcare or family care or housing. This is an area that we really need to consider as well, as a way to help really foundational structural help to the world of artists.